WWE 2K22 will hit store shelves in a couple of months, and it's the first mainline WWE game in around 2 years. After the problems that came along with 2K20, 2K Games and the studio Visual Concepts took a step back, as well as an extra year of development time to get 2K22 right. But that got us thinking about wrestling games from the past, both good and bad. I'm Jeremy, and here are 2 of the best and 3 of the worst WWE games of all time. Worst: WCW Backstage Assault. World Championship Wrestling, the rights and tape library of which are currently owned by WWE, certainly had their fair share of great video games like WCW NWO Revenge, WCW vs. The World, and WCW vs. NWO World Tour, Virtual Pro Wrestling 64. However, much like the WWE, they've had their fair share of stinkers. WCW Backstage Assault was the last game based on the promotion, and they certainly didn't go out gracefully. Published by Electronic Arts and developed by Kodiak Interactive, this game also had one of the weirdest concepts for a wrestling video game ever, as none of the bouts took place in a wrestling ring. Every match in WCW Backstage Assault takes place backstage in an arena, as the name suggests. The controls for this game were awkward, the graphics were subpar even for the time, and most of the main game modes were unnecessarily convoluted. To its credit, the game did have an impressive roster, allowing players to enter the ring as anybody from Scott Steiner and Diamond Dallas Page to Eric Bischoff and our good friend Vince Russo. Best: WWE SmackDown Here Comes the Pain. It's worth noting that in terms of which WWE games are either best or worst, this list isn't in any particular order. WWE SmackDown Here Comes the Pain was the 5th edition of the SmackDown series of games, and it was released in 2003. It was the first game to feature some now iconic stars such as John Cena and Batista, and legends from the past like Roddy Piper and others. It also included different versions of wrestlers such as The Undertaker, as he looked during his original WWF run. The game featured more in-depth grappling system. In general, it didn't add much compared to earlier releases. What it did, however, was improve upon and refine what came before it. It's also top of the topic of conversation of old wrestling games that should be remade. Worst: WWF Steel Cage Challenge. As far as WWE games go, the original WWF WrestleMania wasn't much to write home about. The controls were weird, and it didn't look particularly good even for the time, and it opened with a graphic of Hulk Hogan looking like an angry homeless guy on a bus. But it also had its charm, and it's still kind of fun even to this day. Its follow-up, WWF Steel Cage Challenge, on the other hand, had none of these qualities. The developers went with a top-down isometric look, which made the action in the ring a lot easier to see in actual steel cage matches. That's the only positive thing to say about this game, other than it won't explode while you play it. There were a number of changes to the roster, not that anyone would notice, as the graphics are so bad it's really hard to tell who is in this game. Every wrestler in the game has the exact same moveset and no finishers. Not that it matters, as the controls were so bad you probably would not have been able to pull off any of the moves anyway. Definitely one of the worst WWE games of all time. Best: WWF No Mercy. When Visual Concepts and the rest of the team working on WWE 2K22 were interviewed about the game, nearly all of them said they were looking at WWF No Mercy as inspiration. WWF No Mercy was developed by the IKEA Corporation, published by THQ, and was exclusively released on the Nintendo 64. In fact, it was the very last pro wrestling game to be released on that console. It would also be the final wrestling game made by IKEA. The company now goes by the name of Sin Sophia. Though they would take their brilliant game engine for No Mercy and use it for other games like Def Jam Vendetta and Def Jam Fight for New York, the studio refined its system after getting the WWE, then WWF license, and releasing WWF WrestleMania 2000. While that was a fantastic game in its own right, it was surpassed shortly after by No Mercy. Smooth and solid gameplay, amazing presentation, and a robust creative wrestler mode left no doubt that this, by far, was one of the best WWE games for the Nintendo 64. Worst: WWE Aftershock. Before we get to the last WWE game, let us tell you about a little portable system called Nokia Engage, which was the cell phone company's attempt at mixing a portable game system with a cellular telephone. Back in 2002, with Nintendo dominating the handheld market, the concept of a portable game system seemed really interesting. Unfortunately, the Nokia phone was shaped like a taco, and one of the primary factors as to why Aftershock is on the worst list, not the only reason. It's unclear if publisher THQ was contractually obligated to release a WWE game for the handheld device, or they started making it and then realized nobody was buying the thing and stopped caring. Granted, by the time the game was released in 2005, Nokia had released the Engage QD, a significantly redesigned system, but even with these improvements, Aftershock was still a chore to play.